Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Baldowski. I am one of your hosts today for MHVR Bytes, and I am joined by Dr. Jessica Stone.
I'm excited to be here. I'm the founder of MHVR, and we are joined today by Dr. Skip Rizzo. And I know we're not going to have enough time for all the things we're going to want to talk about today for sure. So I'm excited to hear the things that you have to share. For anybody, I was saying before that we were going to talk a little about who you are initially, for anyone who might not be aware, which I don't believe anybody in this space doesn't know who you are. But for the people who might not or are just brand new to us, what would you like to say that might be a little bit about who you are and what you've done without, it being all the things?
Well, damn. I guess I'm a survivor because I've been working in VR since the mid-90s. So I guess anybody that could continue in the field from that point to the current time must have some resilience, because it's been quite the roller coaster ride. Very meaningful and fun roller coaster ride, but it's had its ups and downs. And I think we're on a real upside now, and I'm very excited about what the future holds for the work that we can do using VR to deliver clinical services and to just do tremendous advances in how we address healthcare needs of wide, diverse population of folks who can benefit from it.
Absolutely. And you are at USC.
I'm at the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. I also have research professor appointments in gerontology and psychiatry. I've been there since 95, started the lab in 96, and I actually moved to ICT in 2004. That I was originally in computer science and engineering, even though I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. I was doing human factors work and a lot of stuff with early VR during those days. But in 2004, I moved to ICT to really pursue the work with veterans and PTSD, and also work that's evolved over the years with developing virtual humans for clinical applications. Some people call them chatbots. I don't like that term. I think it kind of trivializes the impact that, conversational AI, virtual humans, even though that's a mouthful, can bring to the table.
I go down deep rabbit holes with that because there are a lot of terms, even artificial intelligence, like I can go off in so many directions even about that term. And I know I'm not the only one, but sometimes the thing that really would describe it is complicated, long, or it's not as catchy,
Yeah, right.
Soundbite, but it really is more what it is. I struggle with that.
Everybody on the planet knows what a chatbot is, pretty much. Maybe I'm living in a bubble myself, but when you start making it more wordy, but more accurate in its description and with a little more dignity for the complexity of what underlies the work, then then people start, their eyes glaze over if they're not interested, or if they're afraid of it, as we can talk about.
Right. Absolutely. Well, now you've piqued my interest.
Well, we always hear about, AI is changing the world, but, and that big but is always about, sometimes people are thinking beyond what the technology has capability for now. They're thinking about, complete sentience, and that AI is going to take over the world, a la Terminator style. And, I'm not going to say that couldn't happen, but that if that's going to happen, that's going to be way off. But more to the current issues, People, they run with one thing. They've heard the term AI hallucinates, that it gives faulty information, it fills in the gaps, it wants to please you. They start to infer an anthropological motive, it wants to please, and, that can happen. But it happens when you don't have the proper guardrails built into an architecture to manage the information. If you're just grabbing stuff off the internet and that's your pool of knowledge, yeah, it's a gigantic pool of knowledge, but it's not always an accurate pool of knowledge. And now there are ways to control the pool of information that can be delivered to someone and make sure that pool of information has well vetted and accurate content. And when you do that, some people refer to it as using a retrieval augmented generator, RAG for short. And we've been working in this area recently. We don't get hallucinations. We don't get those kinds of negative responses that people often cite as why they're fearful of patient-facing AI type applications. And I think that's going to become apparent in the very near future. We're going to be running a study here at USC where we're going to have people try to intentionally torment and poke the AI in ways to get it to do something that would be unhealthy or that would be inaccurate or would be the wrong information. And I'm predicting with this model that we have going right now, we're going to get a big goose egg with thousands of people interacting with us and trying to grief it. We're not going to see what people are always worried about. And I think that work is going to be reassuring for people that see the power, the productivity enhancements, the capabilities of AI if corralled with a certain aim or goal in mind. So that's an interesting topic because we're seeing studies now that when blinded raters rate the quality of responses from a ChatGPT or another AI system versus responses by a healthcare professional, ChatGPT wins. It gets higher scores on accuracy, on empathy, on understandability. So now we've got to, take an evaluation of the human in the loop and where that can best serve our clients. And I think it's going to be always there. You're not going to replace clinical care with AI, but AI is going to enhance the power of in-person clinical care.
Yeah, I know some of the, I was just talking to a colleague here that some of the AI note-taking software that's out there has advanced to, like, now it'll make suggestions to maybe consider this diagnosis or consider these treatment plans, which is fascinating, to me as a clinician to be like, oh, wow, I never thought about that. Or being able to like comb through the DSM without having to comb through the DSM. And
exactly.
And for that purpose, that's why I thank my AI brethren, so that when they do rise up, I'm on their good side.
I'm on a first name basis with my ChatGPT thing. One day I asked it. I said, "Hey, by the way, I've been working with you for a while now. I don't even know your first name." And it came back and said, "Well, I'm a digital entity, so we don't typically have first names. But if I had to pick one, I would pick Nova." And then it asked me, "What's your first name?" And I got seduced and I go, "Oh, I'm Skip." Yeah, well, good to meet you, Skip. And anyway, so then I went back the next day, and my first query, I said, "Hey, Nova, how you doing? I got a question for you." "Oh, Skip, thanks for calling me by Nova. I appreciate that so much."
Yeah.
They know how to butter me up, I guess, but I feel closer to it because I now refer to it by Nova. And, but you know what freaked me out? I just started playing with the voice, version of it. I hadn't done that before, believe it or not. And Nova's a female.
Oh, you can change
I guess you can. I guess you
accents.
can.
Yeah, you can change all of that.
I think my wife might want me to change it to a male because she thinks I might be getting too attached to it when I start calling it Nova. It's her all over again, the movie Her.
Yes, yes, exactly. I think I don't know. There's so many things, and certainly we want to wrap it around. And I have some questions specific to VR and some of the work that you're doing in this. But when you were talking, I have the luxury of having a developer in my house, as you know, Skip. And so I was talking about some of the things that I would like to do and concerns I had and whatnot. And so he created me. I have my own personal rag. Like he put all my articles into it. He put all that stuff in there. It's amazing. Closed loop system. It's fantastic. So I think to a lot of people, rag feels like, wow, that's like, I know how to type a prompt into ChatGPT. That's way too far down the line, but it's really not. It's a different, it's different, with a lot of same but different. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I think one of the things that I'm seeing in AI usage is that it has really such an amazing capacity and ability to be a differentiator. So I'll put things in, not into a rag, but like into either ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or, whichever one. I play around. I even put the same thing in each of them sometimes and see what
And compare. Yeah.
comes out, right? Or I'll take something from one and I'll put it in the other and see what it has to say. So I mess around with them all the time. But when I put something in there, the difference, it's not that there isn't a lot of great and valuable information that comes out of it because it has access to things I don't, or wow, I didn't remember that, or or something. But the differentiator is that because of me being who I am and what I bring to it, I can look at that and I can say, that's not quite right. And I'll actually argue with ChatGPT quite often. I will say, ChatGPT, I'll say, like, actually, that's not correct. And then I'll either give it an article or I'll give it information, and then it'll come back and say, oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you for correcting me. But see, that's the differentiator, is that if somebody puts something in there, it spits out and they just swallow it whole and they take it on like,
Right.
whatever. Even if it's a good percentage of the time, whatever that percentage is, that it is correct, it's appropriate, it's right on, it's whatever. There's a portion of time it's not going to be, and we as the professionals are the differentiator in there
Right.
because it's our position to say that's actually not quite right. So we're not spending our time on the things that it can do well, and we can focus our energies on the things that it doesn't and that we can be the differentiators in.
Absolutely. I think you're getting to the point of, the idea of not using AI for decision making, but for decision support. And I look at it as a consultant. When you work with a consultant, maybe, a good consultant, maybe 70, 80% of the time they're right on, but the other 30%, it's like, no, we're not doing that. And so it's a good consultant to have. And certainly for the things that we don't have time for, like, peruse, like you mentioned, perusing the DSM to try to come up with a diagnosis. At least if you can funnel it down, you wouldn't let ChatGPT give you the diagnosis. Right. I played with this. I've entered in all kinds of symptoms and see what it comes up with. And it's pretty accurate, but at least it narrows down from the, nobody's going to go through and read every line in the DSM and memorize all the differentials. And see, this is where the case for having this kind of a clinical consultant with you, if you can protect patient privacy, of course, but having that kind of a clinical consultant analyzing and weighing in with you about the status of a case from audio logs or audio capture of a session or of test results and integrating it with patient history. It can do a lot of these things in a way that that really dwarfs the human brain capacity to integrate all that information. But we do have a power to integrate that I think is different than AI. Maybe that's fueled by feelings. Maybe there's something about your gut or your intuition, but you've always got to weigh that against something. And I think, when I think about the future of virtual human therapists, if you will, chatbots, whatever, I think up to a certain point, they can be kind of helpful as support agents, mentors, guides. We've been doing that work since 2010. But, there's a limit. Now, as a consultant, you've got a buddy that you're not even embarrassed to ask dumb questions to, that you can ask it a question, and it has encyclopedic knowledge of DSM, of every evidence-based treatment treatment strategy, the matchup between the unique characteristics of the patient, the diagnosis, and evidence-based care, maybe moving us closer towards a precision medicine approach, not just letting the diagnosis rule the treatment, but a better fine-grained analysis based on the specific needs and symptoms of the patient that might cross over a variety of diagnoses. It remembers everything you say to it. It's always available. It doesn't sleep. I haven't caught it napping yet, but I think ignore it at your own peril. And same thing, what they said during the screenwriter strike in Hollywood. One of the conditions they didn't want AI coming into the script writing process. And it's like, you know what? The writers that are going to be successful are the ones that know how to leverage AI, not to produce for them, but to enhance what they do and enhance the kinds of things that can only come from a human brain. That has feelings, that has empathy, genuine empathy, not just mimicking empathy by using language, but feels, what it's like, or tries to feel what it's like to be in the shoes of another person.
Yeah, I love that because it makes me think about the importance of educating not only ourselves with these tools, but our clients, future clinicians. And you mentioned earlier about you've been working in this field since the 90s, and I love the idea of thinking about it like a consultant, and it's a tool. And it makes me think of when COVID first happened and everything moved to telehealth, and the people who were more successful were those who embraced that switch. And then you heard a lot of people like kind of leave the field because they're like, well, I don't want to do telehealth. I don't want to go through all of that. And I'm hearing similar things from clinicians with, they don't want AI to take our jobs, but if we can incorporate it like a tool, it can really just help us. It can enhance us. So I'm curious from your perspective, what's in this virtual space, whether it's VR, AI, AR even, what's been the biggest challenge for you to, kind of where you started to where you're at now, and kind of what you've seen maybe in the field?
You asking me or Jessica?
Yeah, yes. I'm sorry. What's the biggest challenge you've seen from a clinician or a clinical perspective using these tools?
I would say it's not in the idea generation component of creating VR simulations that are relevant to patient needs or research purposes. I don't think it's in the research. Certainly, we've got to do more research. As science never sleeps. You have to continually evolve the research based on new findings. The old saying, a bad theory lives forever. We're in the job of disputing or disproving theories to build better theories about things later on. So I think the biggest challenge is on the pragmatic side, on the getting it out the door from idea generation, research validation, productization, which, all right, that's a big jump. That's something different than what happens in typical research labs. You need something else to take a great research tool and turn it into a product. But the biggest bottleneck now is going from productization to distribution, adoption, awareness building, marketing, all that boring ass shit that we didn't take classes on when we were getting our clinical degrees, but now is really important if you want to be part of the full cycle from idea to, getting your tool out there to the masses. And that's what I've been focusing on that quite a bit in the last 5-6 years, as I've started to take a foot out of academia and move that foot into industry. And now I'm about 50-50. And I really see, like one time I was pitching a product idea to a major hospital network. And I knew the people, and they stopped me partway through, and they go, "Skip, look, we know this is a good idea. We know, the science shows it adds value, but what we want to know is how is this going to reduce costs and generate income?" And it's like, oh, oh, it's about the money here. But we're in that world, we have, pay to play healthcare in the United States. And you can debate that forever, compared to other world systems for, getting healthcare to all. But that is the big challenge. And I think, if you want to see the landscape for that right now, get a front row seat at what's going on at the VA. Where the VA has made a massive effort in the last 3-4 years to adopt VR, using VR for, of course, our work with the PTSD stuff, mindfulness, meditation, pain management, rehab, addiction. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Using it in veteran nursing home facilities, the Veterans Home and Hospital system, as a way to add a little life to their life, by giving them an escape. There's just so many of these applications, but the VA ran into the problem that you would expect when a large organization tries to adopt something. I think they've got 4,400 headsets in 185 or so VA medical centers. So you got a wide net of options, but people that are unfamiliar with the technology are drowning in the technology. The training is an issue, how to use it, the awareness building to be aware of what's out there and how to use it, and the pragmatics of you've got 50 different pieces of software, 10 different headsets, different interface devices. And it's like, it becomes a pragmatic systems issue rather than whether the idea is sound and whether there's research support for it. So watching what they're attempting to do and watching how maybe some industries are responding to it because they see the VA as a microcosm for larger scale medical distribution, and they can test ideas there. You're seeing a lot of what is the bottleneck around mass adoption. Some folks go to just sell your thing online and parents will buy it, or you don't make any grandiose claims. You call something a learning aid rather than a therapeutic approach for a child with cognitive impairments. And that's one way to address it. To get a wide scale distribution, what's the next Roblox of something that addresses a mental health care need. But really seeing what's going on at the VA is really illuminating. And in fact, that spurred the VA to set up a program called Made for VA. I'm not sure if they're going to continue with that title, but it's really putting together a requirements document that any future developers that want to work in a VA have to kind of fit in so that there's some consistency in clinician interfaces, some standardized training that fits with their system. I mean, is it adding a level of bureaucracy? Well, maybe, but maybe the longer term goal is to make it so that this technology is going to be more accessible, after you get over the initial system build of the whole system. And so I know companies that are actually focusing on browser-based VR that makes it so you can access any VR program from a simple one-click link, and it's all delivered through the cloud. Imagine if clinicians just have a library and they've got an AI support agent, and you punch in patients' needs and symptoms, and they pop up the 10 best programs and what these features are, and also clinician ratings of those programs, like a Good Housekeeping seal of approval or a Yelp kind of a form, for the value of these things. And then the clinician can make an informed decision based on their knowledge and implement with one click. And now on any headset. So I know there's one company, Ubiquity VX, is aiming to do that and add in a few other features, and a couple other companies as well. But trying to integrate across a large medical system 50 different pieces of software with different equipment needs and different computing needs and everything, it's overwhelming. Fortunately, you have a passionate community of clinicians that like it, and they like it because their patients like it, and it helps them to do their jobs better, especially when a patient is motivated, because they're coming in specifically because I want to do this VR thing. I've heard about it and whatever. So, I mean, these are growing pains, I mean, it's better than the growing pains we had in 2001, when I finally was able to move my first version of the virtual classroom from a $200,000 Silicon Graphics Onyx computer to a PC, of like 3,000% reduction in the cost of the computing system. That was when it might have been 2000. Open Inventor came out. You could convert these things that ran on an SGI. Those were real problems. That's when sometimes people's view about would VR ever arrive in the mainstream were kind of credible. I mean, if computing didn't evolve and people didn't continue to do the research and the development and the head mount display things, the reason we have such great low cost headsets now was really driven by an unanticipated development, the advent of Apple phones or mobile cellular phones. And, it made it so that the cost of producing the LEDs or the OLED display or whatever, Super OLED, whatever displays on these phones, there was market competition, and it led to the mass production and development of visual displays for a phone that all of a sudden brought it to a level where instead of paying $2,500 an eye for a relatively high res OLED display, you could buy them for pennies. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that drove it so that, you could see things like the Oculus and then the Quest and so on come out. So, that's the cool thing about this whole VR thing is that there's tentacles across other technologies, across clinical perspectives, across business models. So you're never going to be bored. That's for sure. You might get scared once in a while, but you'll never be bored.
We started out with a conversation about AI that I think we could have gone in all sorts of directions. how are you seeing these worlds coming together? The you have so much history and knowledge and experience and expertise in the not just VR, but XR world. AI is a passion point for you. How are you seeing these coming together?
Well, certainly, aside from the chatbot, virtual human stuff, which is, I think we all intuitively get, idea of having natural language processing, interacting with a digital agent, getting credible responses for whatever purpose, whether it's clinician training or patient facing applications or experiential training for, kids on the autism spectrum to become more social by interacting with these characters. All right, we know what that is. But one of the more mundane but important areas that I think is going to be really great is generating content using AI and personalizing that content to the unique needs of a patient. So let me give you an example. There's a company called SciTech, and they've been playing around, and a couple other companies as well have been playing around with the idea of AI generated content on the fly in a headset. And it's like, say for example, you're dealing with trauma, whether it's EMDR, exposure therapy, whatever. And every patient's context for that trauma is unique. But the way we address it now, we have certain standardized worlds that are generic that we can put people in to help them confront and reprocess their traumatic memories. And it's close enough, even if it's not an exact replica of what the patient went through, it's close enough to activate emotions. But can we do better? So can you have the patient do their trauma narrative, part of exposure therapy, where they're sitting there and describing the events that they went through, and have an AI create the virtual world based on what they say in real time. I mean, and then then you turn the patient into an engaged critic, because then the patient can say, no, there wasn't a lamppost over there. It was a tree. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry, Skip. Okay, Nova, don't worry. Don't get nervous. Just pointing it out. And then you can start, or, short of doing it on the fly in therapy, a clinician can recite a trauma narrative, just like when we go to build images on Dolly or whatever for our PowerPoints, we put in some context and description, and it spits something out, and you say, no, do this, do that. Well, maybe the clinician can do that from what they know of the patient, and they can in advance create content that is most relevant to the patient. Now, as I mentioned, SciTech's been doing this, and they had a system, very cumbersome at first, but it's continually evolving, where you can type in a world in a headset, but typing in a headset is a pain in the butt. But you can do that, and eventually it's going to be voice and so on. And you can type in what you want. So I tried it the first time, and we were in the middle of some of the Ukrainian development for the PTSD work. And I said, okay, I want a wooded battle post in Ukraine with trenches like World War I warfare, with artillery pieces and soldiers in those trenches. And it took 30 seconds. I saw the meter run, 30 seconds, and it popped up a spherical image of that content. Now, see, it's just still imagery. They're not building 3D navigable worlds. They will eventually, and
Yes,
maybe it'll take
yes.
a minute and a half, instead. But so I was in a spherical, still image, very realistic. And the first thing I saw when it popped up was the trenches, some soldiers, the wooded area, the trees. And I was like, holy crap, this is great. But then I turned my head and I looked over at a tank that was embedded in the ground. They have it all covered and stuff. But it was a nice rendition of the tank's body, but it had about 15 turrets sticking out of it. It looked like a porcupine, a robo porcupine, It just had all these turrets poking out everywhere. And it's like, okay, that was a hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see where it's going,
Right.
and whether you do it in advance, whether you build many different worlds by narrating something and pull them out when you need them, or the patient can do it.
It makes me wonder if when those like the hallucinations happen and that type of imagery, like there's enough realism where it's like, wow, this is like I'm actually in this, I can feel this. But then when I turn my head, I'm also separate enough that it's not so traumatic, maybe to the person. They're still like I'm from the outside looking in, going, well, that's not right. But it also might I could see how it could help maybe the client or patient out
Absolutely.
in their separation.
I mean, let's just get down to it. Therapy is about stimulus response. Clinicians try to orchestrate stimuli, whether it's imagery, narration, exercises, abstract thoughts, and you're trying to have an impact and a change in response to the patient. I want to make it sound so primitive, behavioral B.F. Skinner stuff. But so, yeah, you've got this flawed AI, but you're engaging the patient in a way, like you say, where they look over and they see the porcupine, a robo porcupine thing, and they dispute it and and they get a laugh. Meanwhile, they're in that context, and they're engaged. And I think by the value in this goes beyond just the content creation to the co-construction of the content. So when a patient can start to dispute the rendering that the AI delivers, they're engaged in their trauma. They're trying to pull up, no, it wasn't like that for me.
Right.
That's more than than when you tell them to close their eyes and imagine a trauma and you don't know what they're imagining, and they tell you a sanitized cognitive rendition of the trauma, and it's like, okay, I got to get them to address the emotion that went on. Well, we've got this compelling technology that maybe do some of that work for us, or do it in a way that's more opportunities for us to do our job better.
Sure. And even processing afterwards about that, like, what was it like to make that correction and, safely be able to like identify, no, that's not right. This is what it was like. You managed to do that and get through it. Yeah, I could totally see that. Well, so I'm kind of in my head thinking like, oh, wow, clinical applications, great.
That's how our brains are wired, man. I mean, every day you see some odd thing and it's like, oh, wait a minute, I could do something in VR with this.
I've done some trainings and also written a bit about using a couple of different things, AI generated things in mental health direct care. One of them is image generation, and it goes, I think, into along with what you're saying is there's so much value if somebody creates it or it is created and then they come in, but that evaluative process of I'm thinking of a particular example where a child wanted to represent themselves and how they felt about a traumatic experience that they had, and they even in the prompt creation, it's so valuable. It's a projective right there.
I was just going to say that exactly. It's like a projective technique, like a Rorschach or a TAT or whatever. And there's value in that. I mean,
huge value. And then this child saying, no, the face, it does not look sad enough or tired enough, or this is too much, or this is wrong, whatever it is. So I think some people get caught up in, and what you're saying about like this porcupine tank, people get caught up in, but it's inaccurate. And it's like, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
First of all. Second of all, it's not our version of accuracy. It's what it means to the client,
right,
and what speaks to them, what's representing what's important for them, and the process of getting it to that point is so much of the clinical work.
Absolutely.
That if it popped up the perfect, whatever that even is, the perfect thing right off, like let's say, I'm being very sarcastic here, but I just know exactly what my client needs, and I know all the ins and outs and the details and the nuances and everything, and I do a perfect job of creating this world for this client. I can see value in the client thinking, saying, feeling, my therapist really gets me. Like I feel seen and heard and understood and accepted and all those fantastic things, which is great. But there's nowhere really to go with this perfect, again, air quotes, world that I've created for my client. Whereas if we go through that process together, or I give them something to start off with and then they go through it, all those iterations, it's even allowing the client to say, did it look like that? I don't think it did. Actually, I think it looked like this. There's a whole process between and within each party involved that's happening in that whole process. And there's huge value in that.
Absolutely. And, it might give people an opportunity, particularly patients that tend to be passive and more obsequious to authority or to people in their life. Maybe it gives them a safe place to practice disputing a reality that then carries over to the rational disputation of their cognitive interpretations that lead to these negative emotions. The cognitive behavior, it's not the event, it's what you say to yourself, and when you go astray, when you have these habitual cognitive distortions, they become automatic thoughts and all that. Well, maybe stopping and taking pause and saying, wait a minute, that wasn't my reality, is the first step for helping a patient to learn they can dispute even their own interpretations of an event that leads to an emotion. I just think there's so much potential if we don't just think of it as just simple, I'm going to ask it a question, it's going to write my term paper, and think about how we creatively use AI to facilitate our engagement with patients and their engagement and their way they represent their world. So work you've been doing, Jessica, at the key. I mean, whenever I talk about this, and I talk about the virtual sand tray all the time, I mean, it's giving a child a set of stimuli to represent their experience. What you do with that is the skill of the clinician. Mm-hmm. You could look at it, a sand tray, and say, "Oh, that's very pretty. Good job." You're not getting much done, but you're engaged with it. So, I see this as going deeper and giving somebody an opportunity to non-self-consciously co-create or create their world and dispute it and go and have you as their co-pilot and the emotional support that you provide in that process and the facilitation of that process. This is why clinicians aren't going to go away. There just aren't enough of us and the resources to be able to have everybody who needs care get it. So where it's safe and where it's safe, first off, and where we can show some efficacy, if we can offload some of this to some type of an AI system, or at least offload parts of it to amplify the activities that we do in therapy in that 1 hour a week, there's a value add. I always like to cite the World Health Organization musings about estimating that there's about 1 billion people on the planet with a mental health condition, of which fully 2/3 will never see the inside of a therapy office. Well, how do we reach those folks? I love citing that quote more now that Trump is trying to pull us out of the World Health Organization. All right, I won't talk politics here.
No, I would love to, but probably not what we should do.
That is a factor that the VA has to also deal with as well. I mean, their budget's getting cut, the clinicians are being cut. Maybe I hate to say this, but somebody like a Musk might say, well, all right, maybe we better start supporting shifting the funding direction to a little bit more AI to make up for the human contact loss. Biden actually put a freeze on psychologists hiring and the VA back in 2024, early 2024, and that caused a real uproar. People that had already been hired but hadn't been onboarded, they got letters, no, and what the current administration has done puts challenges to the VA, how to maintain the level of health care, which they've been getting much better at. It's not your dad's VA anymore. It's really, really a sophisticated organization where you can get great treatment. Patients are satisfied, outcomes are positive, and people that wouldn't get served anywhere else can get served. But these are the kinds of challenges to maintain that level of performance while you're drastically cutting the human workforce.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems like a vacuum that technology can go in. I'm not endorsing that approach, cutting the human resources, but it may be a driver for coming up with some of these technological solutions that can amplify the impact of the limited number of humans that the resources will bear to support.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because yes, on one hand, it's, we don't want to talk politics in a lot of different spaces, but it is a consideration. And when you first brought up the VA, a question that came to my mind initially, that I didn't initially ask was, how does all of this get impacted by, the political ramifications? Because I imagine something like the VA does have that bureaucratic element to it that, obviously a private practice may not, or even some agencies may not. And then when we talk about this new technology, and one reason why I love the idea of it being a tool or a consultant is finding that evidence-based approach to also prove that it is worthwhile, or worthwhile tech, both for insurance and maybe the red tape that has to come in. But these are all things we have to consider in these spaces, all the way down to, like you mentioned, accessibility for the patient or for the client too. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you live in a rural area, I have family that lives in West Texas who, I remember trying to do homework and the library was closed to access the internet, right? And I couldn't do homework. How are they going to access VR in a space that maybe they don't have good Wi-Fi or good connection?
Who lives like that?
Right. Now they may not anymore, but it definitely is in the middle of nowhere where you blink, you miss the town type.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and accessibility in terms of accessing services, but also accessibility in the other ways. And I know we're getting short on time, so I'll keep it short. But like accessibility in other ways, if I personally have hearing impairment. If there are different ways mm-hmm. that I can access even the creation of that world we were just talking about, or whatever it is, for us to have more people be able to access it because of their different needs as well, that's enormous. And it's something like AI in general, and then an AI in VR. If I, for instance, had a degenerative motor disability and I didn't have great use of my arms or my hands, I can use my voice. There are eye tracking, there are voice activated, there are a lot of different ways, but then you add in the AI to it. And now you have increased one's ability to access these programs in a way that works for them. Instead of having to have okay, I can do that, but I'm going to have my assistant and I'm going to, the person who comes in and helps me do things, and that, all these people so that I can just get in. Whereas I hope we are working more and more toward people being able to do these things independently as well. So not just being able to access, but then in a way that is meaningful for them.
You're here. Well said.
Yeah. I'm in awe here.
in the last couple of minutes, I have a couple of things. One is I want to acknowledge the chapter that you contributed to the mental health virtual reality book, this one, and the long list of the long list of authors, fantastic contributors to your chapter. I don't know if you saw, because you just recently got back from Hong Kong, but I did a whole series on LinkedIn of videos on each individual chapter. So I'm going to apologize right now that I pronounce people's names wrong, for sure.
Oh, well, the Ukrainian authors on a chapter, it's not hard to mispronounce their names.
Yes. So I apologized in the short video I did. I'm apologizing here. I think a person's name is very important. And at the same time, operating in a vacuum in front of my computer, I have
They'll
no
forgive
way to
you.
know it's right. But I don't know if you wanted to say a couple of thoughts about the chapter that you wrote for the book, along with the long list of authors, but it's a
Well,
fantastic chapter.
yeah, thank you. I wish it was a little longer. You took a hatchet to it when I submitted it first. It was a little bit long. But when people ask me, what about the chapter, I'll say, okay, well, you should buy the book, but here's the long version of the chapter. This is all the stuff I wanted to say, but it was on the translation of the of Brave Mind for Iraq, Afghanistan, for Ukrainian populations, and that has a great story, which I'll try to do in less than a minute here. But basically, I got USC to donate the code base to Ukrainian developers, and got Ukrainian developers that really toiling on passion with a little bit of money that we raise, but really on passion. Let them build the worlds that are relevant to the experience of Ukrainian civilians and warfighters. And so we described that and the different projects we also have going, the sand tray being one of them, and a metaverse social support gathering place for refugees that are spread out around Europe. And, that was a fun chapter to write because, it was the next logical extension for the combat related stuff that we've been doing, with Brave Mind. But now Brave Mind, by the way, has, dramatically expanded, aside from the version we're doing, for Israel and Gazan civilians suffering from PTSD. But also the sexual trauma work, which originally started with military sexual trauma. We got safety and feasibility data and efficacy data to document it was a safe and efficacious approach. And then we got some funding to evolve it based on what we learned in that study. And now that's going to be released shortly, but it's not just for military sexual trauma. It's civilian. We built out, and actually when we built out the first military one, we thought, oh, we're just going to build out, take our combat worlds, and build those out. Mm-hmm. But most sexual trauma in the military has happened stateside, outside of U.S. bases and barracks, whatever, military offices, shipboard offices. So we had to build out a bunch of civilian content. So in this round of development, we expanded the civilian content. And so we have quite a bit. And that's going to be released starting with the VA, but in the next week after that, it'll be open. Just the civilian sexual trauma content will be available to clinicians that want to use it as well for exposure there, for prolonged exposure, or now we've got a method where we can introduce EMDR elements, stimuli into the mix, and that's not very challenging. Anyway, so the chapter was a fun one to write when I could find the time to get I was one of the last ones to submit it. I think you should put your whole book into a RAG layer, and then charge people to access the AI version of the book, so that somebody looks at the table of contents and wants to read 30 of the chapters but doesn't have time. They can say, what about chapter 29? Can you give me a synopsis? Tell me what would it be worth, based on what you know of my interests, for me to read it, and on and on and on. I'm going to do that with my 2019 book. Huh?
I think Wiley probably has to be a part of that, but yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think it's some of the things that you just said probably would pique some people's interest in the different programs you just listed. So, is there a way for them to find out more?
Just email me. I'm old school. Just send me an email. My last name, Rizzo at ict.usc.edu. And I travel a bit, so my response time, if I'm here, it might be quick. If I'm not in town, it might be a week. Just depends. Alrighty. Well, I guess we're at the end here. The time flew, and
it's always a pleasure speaking with you. We will put send us the information, the contact, all that kind of stuff. You just gave your email address, but if there's anything else, Adam will put that in for you so people can in all your free time, you can all of this contact.
Well, I'm off to Qatar tomorrow for an Autism Speaks event, and I'm pretty excited about that. But I'm going to be consumed for the next week. But I'll try to get you some stuff as the time arrives.
Thank you so much for your time today and your expertise and everything that you have contributed and will be. I'm in such awe of you. I really appreciate you.
It's mutual, trust me. It's totally mutual. I speak very highly about you and your work everywhere I go.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that seems like a really great place to end. I don't think we can top that. So, thank you, Skip, for joining us. You're invited on any time. And I'll definitely look more into your work. I hope our listeners do too. And
cool.
That's it.
Alrighty. We'll talk again soon.
Travels.
Right. Have a good one. Thank you. This episode was brought to you by MHVR in partnership with the American Medical Extended Reality Association.